We're told Christmas is a time of joy, but the darkness doesn't care what day it is. Grab your hot cocoa, sit by the fireplace, and try to stay warm. These aren't your typical holiday tales. These are real, disturbing stories that happened on the coldest nights of December. There are no happy endings here, just the cold, dark truth. Turn off the lights and listen. While most people in Anchorage, Alaska, were preparing for Christmas, decorating their homes against the darkness that lasts nearly 20 hours a day in winter, Robert Hansen was busy with a different kind of preparation. Known locally as a gifted baker and an elite hunter, Hansen was the personification of the Alaskan American dream. But beneath the facade of the family man providing bread for the town's holiday tables, hid a monster whose cruelty flourished in the extreme cold. Born in 1939 in Iowa, Robert did not have an easy life. He was a skinny youth, suffering from severe acne that left permanent scars, and a stutter that made him an easy target for schoolyard bullies. Rejected and humiliated, he developed a deep, silent resentment, particularly toward women. To compensate for his social fragility, he became a master of weaponry. He didn't just hunt. He mastered the art of tracking, becoming an award-winning archer and marksman. In 1967, he took this skill set to Alaska, where the geographic isolation allowed his darkest instincts to grow unchecked. Hansen's plan was surgical. He targeted women he considered disposable by society, young women working in nightclubs or on the streets of Anchorage. During the long, freezing nights of December, he would lure them with money or kidnap them at gunpoint. The horror began in his basement, a soundproofed room where he held them captive while his wife and children were away. But the peak of his perversion happened in the air. Hansen, an experienced pilot, would place his victims in his private airplane, a Piper Super Cub, and fly toward the Kinnick River Valley, an area so remote that the loudest scream would be swallowed by the polar wind. There he would release them into the snow. He didn't kill them immediately. He forced them to run. Armed with his scoped precision rifle, he would wait for the moment their fear reached its peak to begin the hunt. Hansen tracked them through the fresh snow and gunned them down like big game trophies. Christmas of 1983 could have been the last for 17-year-old Cindy Paulson. Kidnapped and shackled, she was taken to the airport. In a moment of distraction, Cindy, barefoot and in a panic, managed to jump from the car and run across the frozen tarmac. Her account was so detailed and terrifying that the police could not ignore it. When investigators entered Hansen's home, the festive Christmas setting contrasted sharply with the horror they discovered. Behind a false wall lay his trophy map. On it, Hansen had carefully marked 17 locations with an X. Each mark corresponded to a body buried in the Alaskan wilderness. In addition to the map, they found jewelry from missing women and the .223 rifle he used in his human hunts. During interrogation, Hansen's coldness shocked detectives. He showed no remorse, only the pride of a hunter who had dominated his territory for over a decade. Following his evaluation, psychiatrists were definitive. He was in his right mind. He knew exactly what he was doing. He wasn't insane. He was evil by choice. Robert Hansen was sentenced to 461 years in prison. He died in 2014 in a prison hospital, taking the secrets of where his other victims are buried to his grave, secrets the map never fully revealed. To this day, when the snow falls in Anchorage at Christmas, Now, many remember that the ice doesn't just hide the ground, but also the scars left by the baker who turned human beings into prey. Robert Hansen hunted his victims in the vast frozen wilderness of Alaska. But our next case proves that you don't always have to be in the wild to be prey. Sometimes the hunter is much closer, standing just outside your window, watching you celebrate through the glass. The Jonelle Matthews case, Christmas Eve, 1984, Greeley, Colorado. The air outside is so cold. It hurts to breathe. But inside the Matthews home, everything is warmth. The red and green lights on the Christmas tree flicker rhythmically. There's a piano in the corner, scattered sheet music of carols, and the scent of cinnamon floats in the air. Janelle, just 12 years old, has just arrived home after singing in the church choir. She's tired but happy. Her father is at a basketball game. Her mother is out of town caring for a relative. Janelle walks in, locks the door, and prepares to wait for her father. The house is silent. That absolute silence that only fallen snow can create. An hour later, her father, Jim Matthews, arrives home. He opens the door expecting to see his daughter asleep on the couch or watching a Christmas movie. But what he finds leaves him paralyzed. The house is warm. The tree lights are still on. Jonelle's shoes are by the door. Her coat is on the couch. There's even a half-finished cup of cocoa, but Jonelle is gone. Jim runs up the stairs screaming her name. He checks the closets, under the beds, the dark basement, nothing. There are no signs of a struggle, no broken windows, no traces of blood on the white carpet. It is as if Jonelle had vanished into thin air, leaving only the echo of her carols in the room. But here's where the suspense becomes unbearable. Looking closer at the fireplace, Jim notices something. Someone had been there. Someone moved the logs. Someone sat in his favorite chair. As police searched the snow outside, they found footprints. Boot prints coming from the woods, stopping in front of the living room window, encircling the house over and over. Someone had been watching Jonelle through the glass while she sang. Someone who waited for the exact moment. She was alone for 35 years. Jonelle's chair at Christmas dinner remained empty. The case became an urban legend in the United States. They said Jonelle was the girl on the milk carton, her face printed in millions of homes. But no one knew where she was. Until the summer of 2019, a few miles from the house, construction workers digging a pipeline hit something solid under the frozen earth. It wasn't a rock. It was a small skull. Beside it, they found the remains of a party dress, the same one Jonelle wore to sing in the choir that last Christmas Eve. But the true horror was not finding her. It was discovering who took her. Police arrested Steve Pankey. He was not a stranger. He was a 69-year-old man who had been a public figure, even running twice for governor of the state of Idaho. Pankey was no ordinary criminal. He was a man obsessed with the case. For decades, he attended Jonelle's memorials. He relished the parents' pain, reliving his crime every Christmas as if it were a trophy. Pankey was indicted for the murder of Jonelle Matthews after decades as a cold case. He was accused of kidnapping the child from her own home and is suspected of murdering her with a single gunshot to the head. The politician, who was even a Republican primary candidate, was held without bail, facing charges of first-degree murder and kidnapping. The Greeley Police Department stated that this mystery haunted the community and that Jonelle had become a daughter to everyone. Today, Steve Pankey finally faces justice, But for those listening to this story by the fire, the question remains the same. Tonight, as you look at the lights on your tree, are you sure no one is watching you from the darkness of the garden? Are you sure the creak you hear on the roof is just the wind sometimes? The monster is not in legends. Sometimes he is in the news, asking for your vote, waiting for the moment to enter your home. The story of Jonelle Matthews was only the beginning. If you have plans to sleep peacefully tonight, don't watch the next story. What happened in the Ramsey mansion is just something no one should ever have to hear. The Ice Princess, JonBenet Ramsey, Christmas night, 1996. Boulder, Colorado. The Ramsey mansion looks like something out of a fairy tale. The lights are glowing. The massive Christmas tree is surrounded by expensive gifts. And the family has just returned from a festive party. JonBenet, a 6-year-old girl, a child beauty queen with an angelic smile, is carried to bed by her father. Everything seems to be at peace. The silence of the fresh snow covers the city like a blanket. But at 8 o'clock in the morning, the peace is shattered forever. Patsy Ramsey, the mother, walks down the stairs toward the kitchen to prepare breakfast and finds something that turns her blood to ice. 3 sheets of paper are resting on the step. It's a ransom note, 3 pages long, handwritten. It demands $118,000 in exchange for her daughter. "We have your daughter," it reads. "Oh, if you want to see her again, follow our instructions." JonBenet is gone from her bed. The police arrive at the mansion. The house is locked from the inside. There are no footprints in the fresh snow in the garden. There are no broken windows. The question hanging in the air is terrifying. How did someone enter without leaving a trace? Or was the intruder already inside? Hours of agony pass as the family waits for a call from the kidnappers. A call that never comes. At noon, a detective asks the father, John Ramsey, to search the house from top to bottom. John goes down to the basement, to a dark, cold room used for storing Christmas decorations. There, under a white blanket, he finds what no one wanted to see: the lifeless body of JonBenet. But what the autopsy revealed was the true horror. The little girl hadn't just been killed, she had been tortured. She had duct tape over her mouth and nylon cords around her neck and wrists, forming a makeshift garrote. Someone took their time. Someone on Christmas night, while the parents slept just a few yards away, was committing an atrocity in the darkness of the basement. This is where the story becomes truly disturbing. The ransom note was written with a pen and paper found inside the house. The amount demanded, $118,000, was the exact amount of the Christmas bonus the father had received that year. Only someone with total access to the house could have known that. For decades, suspicion fell on the parents, and even the older brother, Burke. Every shadow was analyzed. Every whisper in the 911 call was dissected. Was it an intruder who crawled through a broken basement window? Or was it a family secret buried under the Christmas tree? To this day, the case remains officially unsolved. But DNA found on the girl's clothing belongs to an unknown male. A ghost who entered the mansion, committed the cruelest crime imaginable, and vanished into the Christmas night. Tonight, while your children sleep and the house is silent, remember the Ramsey basement. Sometimes the ransom note is already written before you even wake up. And sometimes the danger doesn't come down the chimney. It's already living with you. under the very same roof before we move to the next story, don't you want to go check if your children are still in bed? If you are still here, you've proven you have a strong stomach. But the next case is where most people stop. It turns the most beloved symbol of Christmas into a living nightmare. If you want to keep your childhood memories intact, turn off the video now. I'm serious. You don't want to know what was inside the gift. The Santa Claus of Covina, Christmas Eve 2008, Covina, California. The Ortega family home is overflowing with life. It is a typical large family gathering, music, laughter, the aroma of a home-cooked dinner, and about 25 guests celebrating the joy of being together. Among them is the ex-wife of Bruce Pardo. Their bitter divorce had been finalized only days before, at exactly 11:30 p.m. There was a knock at the door. An 8-year-old girl, glowing with excitement and thinking it's a late-night holiday surprise, runs to answer it. On the other side, she sees the most iconic figure of the season, a man dressed in a full Santa Claus suit, carrying a massive package wrapped in festive paper. The girl smiles, but before she can say a word, the man pulls out a handgun and shoots her directly in the face. The man is Bruce Pardo, and that red suit is not for spreading joy. It is the uniform for a meticulously planned execution. Pardo storms into the house, firing indiscriminately at his former in-laws. But the most terrifying part was not the gun, it was the gift he was carrying. Inside that large package was a pressurized air compressor converted into a homemade flamethrower, loaded with gallons of high-octane racing fuel. After the initial shooting, Pardo began spraying the interior of the home with the liquid fuel. In seconds, the Christmas sanctuary was transformed into a hellish furnace. The decorations, the tree, and the presents fueled a fire so intense that neighbors said the flames reached 50 feet into the air. 9 people lost their lives that night. But the final horror was revealed when police found Bruce Pardo's body hours later. He had taken his own life, but his Santa suit was fused to his own skin. The heat from the inferno he created was so extreme that the synthetic costume melted, sealing his fate in the most macabre way imaginable. In his getaway car, police found a map to his former mother-in-law's house and thousands of dollars in cash. He intended to keep killing. But the hell he unleashed in that living room was so violent that even the monster himself couldn't escape unscathed. Today, the community of Covina remembers every Christmas Eve not just with prayers, but with a silent, lingering fear. Tonight, when you hear a knock at your door at 11:30 p.m., do not let the children run to answer it, because sometimes the red suit doesn't hide a saint. It hides a man who has decided that this will be your last toast. Lock your doors tight. The fire in the fireplace isn't the only thing that can burn tonight. If you thought the Santa Claus of Covina was the limit of human depravity, you were wrong. The next case is so heavy, so cold, that even the investigators couldn't look at the crime scene for long. If you want to keep any sense of peace tonight, don't listen to this. This isn't just a crime. It's the systematic erasure of an entire bloodline. The monster of Mockingbird Hill. The story of Ronald Simmons begins on July 15, 1940, in Chicago, after a childhood raised by his parents, Loretta and William. Ronald decided at age 17 that academic life wasn't for him. He dropped out of school and enlisted in the Navy. It was at his first naval base in Washington that he met Rebecca Becky, whom he married in 1960. Over nearly 2 decades, the Simmonses formed a large family of 7 children as he moved from the Navy to the Air Force. In the military, Simmons was seen as a man of discipline and precision, an elite marksman decorated with the Bronze Star. However, after retiring in 1979 as a master sergeant, the facade of the military hero began to crumble. By 1981, the darkness behind the Simmons doors came to light. Ronald was under investigation for fathering a child with his own 17-year-old daughter, Sheila. Terrified by the possibility of going to prison, he fled with his family in the summer of 1983 to Arkansas, settling on an isolated 13-acre plot of land known as Mockingbird Hill. There, they lived in precarious conditions in a makeshift structure made of 2 old mobile homes joined together with no telephone or indoor plumbing, surrounded by a 10-foot fence that isolated them from the world. Simmons struggled to keep even low-paying jobs. In fact, he was fired from an accounting position for sexual harassment and ended up quitting a convenience store in mid-December 1987. What followed was a spiral of systematic horror. On December 22, 1987, Simmons fatally attacked his wife, Becky, and their 29-year-old eldest son, beating and shooting them. Then, without mercy, he strangled his 3-year-old granddaughter. He buried them all in a shallow grave that he himself had forced the children to dig months earlier, under the lie that it was for a new outhouse. That same day, when the school bus dropped off the younger children for Christmas break, he led them one by one to their deaths, strangling them or drowning them in rainwater barrels. Their bodies ended up in the same pit. But the massacre did not end there. Simmons waited. On December 26th, the rest of the family arrived for a late Christmas dinner. William, 23, along with his wife Renata and their baby, were met with gunfire. Their bodies were covered with blankets next to the dining table, while the child was hidden in the trunk of a car. Then arrived Sheila and her husband Dennis with their 2 children. Simmons executed them all. Sheila was placed on the table like a macabre trophy. Dennis was shot, and the children, including Sylvia, the daughter Simmons had with Sheila, were strangled. Following this horror, Simmons spent Sunday in absolute calm, surrounded by the corpses of his own blood. On Monday the 28th, the violence moved to the city. Simmons drove to Russellville, bought another gun, and unleashed a shooting spree at several locations: a law office, the store where he used to work, and a local business. He killed a receptionist and a firefighter and seriously wounded his former supervisor. Finally, after cornering an employee, he ordered her to call the police, saying, "I have come to do what I wanted to do. I finished off everyone who wanted to hurt me." He surrendered without resistance. Ultimately, Simmons was transferred to the Arkansas State Hospital, where specialists were definitive. He was in his right mind. He did not suffer from any mental illness that prevented him from distinguishing right from wrong. He was fully aware of the atrocity of his acts and executed them with absolute coldness. The first trial lasted less than 6 hours, and on May 12, 1988, he was sentenced to death. Simmons, in a final display of control, waived all of his appeals. Even during the second trial, he showed his true violent nature by attempting to attack the prosecutor after letters regarding the abuse of his daughter were revealed. On May 31st, 1990, he was executed by lethal injection. His final words were a challenge: "Justice delayed, when it is finally done, is justifiable homicide." In the end, no one claimed his body, and he was buried in a pauper's grave as rejected by the living as he was by his own family. Before we finish, are you sure you know who is sitting at your table this Christmas? The story of Ronald Simmons showed us the level of depravity a human being can reach. But sometimes, what is impossible to explain is even more terrifying than what we can see. Don't listen to what happened to Brandon Swanson if you are afraid of the dark, because in this story, the danger has no face, and the line cuts out exactly when the nightmare begins. The last word. The vanishing of Brandon Swanson. The last time Brandon Swanson spoke to anyone was on Christmas night. He was 19 years old. It was 2:30 a.m. on December 25th, 2008, when Brandon called his parents from his cell phone. He sounded calm. He told them he had been in a minor car accident, but that he was okay. He wasn't injured. He didn't need an ambulance. He just needed a ride. Brandon had been celebrating Christmas Eve with friends in Marshall, Minnesota. He decided to drive home alone. It was a familiar road. Dark, but routine. He never made it back. During the call, Brandon explained that his car had ended up in a ditch. He believed he knew exactly where he was. His parents got in their car and began following his directions while staying on the phone with him. Something didn't feel right. Every time his parents said they saw a certain intersection, Brandon insisted he wasn't there. Every time Brandon described his surroundings, his parents saw nothing like it. Both sides were certain they were right. Despite the confusion, Brandon started walking. He said he could see lights in the distance and was going to head toward them. As he walked, he continued talking to his father. Wind noise came through the call. His footsteps sounded steady for 47 minutes. Brandon talked without sounding panicked. Then, something changed. Suddenly he said one short sentence, clear, sharp. Oh shit. That was it. The call disconnected. His parents tried calling him back again and again. The phone rang, but no one answered. A few minutes later, Brandon's phone powered off. Permanently. Police began searching at sunrise. Helicopters, tracking dogs, patrol units, and volunteers were deployed. Brandon's car was found quickly. It was indeed in a ditch with no serious damage. But Brandon was nowhere to be found. The dogs followed his scent from the car to the edge of an open field. Then the trail became erratic, as if he had started running and as if panic had set in. And then, nothing. For months, rivers, drainage ditches, culverts, and frozen fields were searched. Nothing was found. No blood, no clothing, no signs of a struggle. Just silence. Over time, investigators realized something disturbing. Brandon was never where he thought he was. The layout of roads, fields, and waterways in that area is extremely confusing at night, especially in winter. He likely walked miles in the wrong direction. He likely fell. But there's a problem. The area where he disappeared was searched multiple times. In different seasons over several years, there were no places where a body could simply vanish without leaving a trace, not even in winter. The case remains unsolved. Brandon's parents still listen to the recording of that phone call, not for hope, but for guilt, because they know the exact second when everything changed. The moment he said, "Oh shit," no one knows what he saw, no one knows what happened next. And every Christmas that audio is played again. Because some people don't disappear all at once. They disappear while someone is still listening. It's easy to feel safe behind a locked door. But as these stories show, the real monsters don't always knock. Take a breath, if you can. The Last Gift, The Silence of the Andersons. On December 25th, 2002. Police in Carnation, Washington received a call shortly after 8 a.m. The caller wasn't screaming, wasn't crying, wasn't asking for help. They said only one sentence. "I think an entire family is dead. The house belonged to the Andersons, a normal family, a young married couple, 3 small children, no history of domestic violence, no serious financial problems, no conflicts with neighbors. It was, quite literally, the last house anyone would expect something like this to happen in." When officers entered, the silence was complete. There were no signs of forced entry, no mess. The Christmas tree was still lit. The presents had been opened. It was as if the celebration had taken place normally, but no one was moving. The bodies were found in different rooms: the father, the mother, and the 3 children. There were no signs of a struggle, no screams reported by neighbors, no visible weapons. The autopsy revealed something disturbing. All of them had died in their sleep. The person responsible was the father. He had waited until the house fell into complete silence, until his children were deeply asleep, until Christmas was officially over. Then, one by one, the most disturbing part wasn't the method. It was the preparation. Days earlier, he had bought normal gifts. He had sent Christmas cards. He had smiled in family photos. No one noticed anything unusual. No one heard threats. No one saw clear warning signs. In the kitchen, police found a note. It wasn't a goodbye letter. It didn't ask for forgiveness. It didn't explain anything. It only said, "So no one gets left behind." Investigators were never able to determine exactly what was going through his mind. There were no drugs in his system, no alcohol, no documented psychiatric episodes. He was aware. He chose the date, he chose the night, he chose Christmas. Criminal psychologists who reviewed the case agreed on one thing. The man didn't want to run. He didn't want to survive. He didn't want punishment. He wanted everything to end at the same time. The most unsettling part came afterward. For weeks, people walking past the house claimed they could see the Christmas tree lights turned on at night, even though the house was empty and had no electricity. Police initially dismissed the reports as collective suggestion, until one officer during a nighttime patrol filed a written report stating he had seen the same thing. Lights on, no power, no one inside. The house was demolished months later. Today, the lot remains empty. No one wanted to buy it. No one wanted to build there. Because there is something especially disturbing about knowing that, while the rest of the world was celebrating. Someone decided that Christmas would be the last one for everyone inside that house. There was no warning, no second chance, just a quiet night. Opened gifts, and a decision made in silence. Some people run from monsters. Others run from memories. But what happens when there is nowhere left to hide? Stay with me. This next case is unlike anything you've heard. The breaking point, the empty eyes of Evelyn Harper. On Christmas in 1996, Evelyn Harper stopped existing for the world, even though her body remained there. She was 41 years old, married, had 2 teenage children, and lived in Columbus, Ohio. From the outside, her life was normal. Not perfect, but stable. Nothing that would draw the attention of police, doctors, or neighbors. That Christmas, the family had dinner together. There was forced laughter, appropriate gifts, photos that would later be tucked away in drawers. No one noticed anything strange about Evelyn. She cooked, talked, smiled. She even raised a toast. At 11:40 p.m., Evelyn went to the second-floor bathroom. She never came back down. At first, they thought she had fallen asleep. Then they thought she felt dizzy. 20 minutes passed, then 40. Finally, her husband went upstairs to look for her. Evelyn was sitting on the floor, leaning against the wall. Her eyes were open. She was breathing, but she didn't react. There was no blood, no pills, no physical signs of anything. The ambulance arrived quickly. The paramedics said she was conscious but not present. She didn't respond to her name. She didn't follow commands. She didn't react to pain. It was as if something inside her had been turned off. At the hospital, the test showed no strokes, no tumors, no obvious neurological damage. Her heart was fine. Her reflexes, too. Technically, Evelyn was healthy, but she didn't speak. She didn't recognize anyone. She didn't react when she saw her children. Doctors diagnosed a severe dissociative state, extremely rare. A defense mechanism so extreme that the mind simply left. For weeks, Evelyn remained hospitalized. She stared at the ceiling for hours. Sometimes she cried without sound. Sometimes she smiled for no reason. She never asked where she was. She never asked to leave. A psychiatrist decided to review her personal history in more detail. And that's when something appeared that no one had connected before. Every December 24th for nearly 10 years, Evelyn had suffered episodes of anxiety, insomnia, nausea, panic attacks with no explanation. Always on Christmas, always at night. Years earlier, when she was a teenager, Evelyn had experienced a very different Christmas. She lived in another city, another house, another context. That night, her father stormed out after a family argument. He never came back. His body was found weeks later. Police called it a suicide. The family never spoke about it again. Evelyn never processed it. She buried it. And for 20 years, she kept living, until her mind decided it couldn't anymore. Christmas night in 1996 wasn't the beginning. It was the breaking point. After months of therapy, something unsettling happened. On December 24th, at exactly 11:40 p.m., Evelyn spoke for the first time. She said only one sentence: "If I stay here, it doesn't happen." She didn't explain anything else. The next day, she returned to silence. Evelyn was discharged sometime later. She returned home, she walked, she ate, she slept. But she was never the same. She didn't remember large parts of her previous life. She didn't recognize dates. She didn't celebrate birthdays, and under no circumstances. Did she ever agree to celebrate Christmas again? Doctors concluded something disturbing. Evelyn hadn't lost her memory due to brain damage. She had chosen to forget, because sometimes the most terrifying thing isn't remembering something horrible. It's remembering it too clearly. And there are minds that, when they find no other way out, simply shut down. Most people think they would know what to do in a crisis. They think they'd fight, run, or call for help. But there are situations so sudden and so strange that your brain simply refuses to process them. You're about to see how quickly a routine night turns into a permanent nightmare. The question isn't what happened. It's whether you'd survive the first 10 seconds. The Christmas stalker. She went upstairs to find her sister, opened the door, and a complete stranger was standing in the middle of the room. But that was only the end. Now listen to how this real Christmas nightmare began. Christmas should be a time of calm, of family, of lights and hugs, but for her, Christmas transformed into a nightmare so real that since that day she never felt safe in her own house again. It all started with something that seemed harmless, a public Instagram account and a comment from a stranger. She had a simple account open to the public. Some vacation photos, selfies, maybe a picture with her sister. Nothing strange, nothing wrong, until one comment stood out among the rest. A man, about 40 or 50 years old, 3 photos on his profile. Hardly anyone followed him. Nobody knew him. His first message was simple, but then he started writing more uncomfortable messages, insinuating comments, or some compliments she didn't ask for. Until one day he sent her this: "I don't want to spend Christmas alone. Let's do something." She rejected him. She blocked him. And she believed that everything was over. But she didn't know that he had already started watching her. Days later, she posted an innocent photo with her sister, taken in front of her house, smiling, peaceful, without noticing one detail. The house number appeared in the image. That detail was enough for him to find where she lived. That night, while she was getting ready for a Christmas dinner, something caught her attention. A black car, unknown, parked between her house and the neighbors. Lights off, tinted windows, no movement. She didn't give it much importance. She thought it was just a visitor, but when she returned hours later, the car was still in exactly the same spot with a cold engine, no signs of anyone entering or leaving. Her stomach tightened. She went straight upstairs to find her sister in the middle of the room, standing there, completely still. A man staring at them without blinking, without saying a single word. He had no mask. He was in no rush. He simply observed them, as if he had been studying them for hours. She recognized him immediately. The face, the beard, the gaze. It was the stalker from Instagram. He had deleted his account. He had been hiding in her house. He had waited. He was for them to be alone. She grabbed her sister and they ran. He rushed her down the stairs. She was out the door. She were straight to the car. They locked the doors and the man appeared running after them. He banged on the door. He struggled with the handle. He shoved his shoulder against it over and over again. The sister was screaming. She was trying to start the car. The panic was total. Finally, the engine started. She floored it and began honking the horn desperately. The man ran to his own vehicle, the same black car that had been watching them, and he fled. The police arrived. They searched the house. The man had entered through a second-floor window. He hid. He waited. He watched. But when they looked for his Instagram profile, it no longer existed. The entire account had vanished. No trace, no name, no photos. No one could identify him. Since that night, she never slept peacefully again. She set her account to private. And every time she sees a strange car in front of her house, she remembers the look on that man's face, standing in the room watching them, as if he already knew everything about them. We spend our lives fearing the face of a stranger in the shadows. But there is a much more primal fear. The fear of being the last human voice in a place where silence is the only answer. Prepare yourself, because now the danger has no face. It has scale flight 508, where the night of peace met chaos, Christmas. 1971 began to die even before the plane took off. In the lobby of the Lima airport, the air was heavy with a dangerous urgency. Julianne Köpke, only 17 years old, watched her mother check the tickets nervously. Every flight was overbooked. Hundreds of people were desperate to get home for Christmas dinner. It was this rush, this invisible pressure of the season, that threw them onto the only available flight, Lanza 508. What they didn't know was that the airline had a terrible reputation. And the aircraft was a collage of spare parts, but it was Christmas Eve, and the desire to be with family ignored every warning sign. The takeoff was the last moment of normalcy, at 21,000 feet. The sky stopped being a path and became a wall. The plane plunged into a cloud system that pilots called the Devil's Forge. Inside the cabin, the clinking of glasses for the Christmas toast was replaced by the sound of metal under extreme stress. The lights flickered and went out. Through the windows, lightning lashed the wing, illuminating faces frozen in panic. Then, a lightning bolt struck the main engine. There was no immediate explosion. There was a catastrophic structural failure. The right wing simply detached from the plane's body, as if the structure had given up the fight. Julianne heard the roar of the wind at minus 30 degrees replace the screams of the people. In a second, the fuselage was gone. She was strapped to her seat, spinning alone in the absolute void, 3,000 meters high. The weight of the chair acted like a helicopter rotor, slowing her fall as she spiraled over the dark carpet of the Amazon. The oxygen vanished from her lungs, and Julianne blacked out as she fell into the green darkness. The awakening. Julianne didn't wake up with a start. She emerged from a deep void on December 25th. The first sound was her own pulse, drumming in her ears. The world was upside down. She was still strapped to the seat, buried in the soft mud of the forest. Her hands shook so much it took her minutes to release the buckle and fall to the ground. The first day was a blur of absolute shock. She spent 24 hours huddled under the seat, while the rain washed the blood from her face. On the second day, clarity returned. Without her glasses, the jungle was a mosaic of green shapes. She fumbled on the ground and found her only Christmas feast, a bag of fruit candies. She tried to stand up, but her knee throbbed, and her broken collarbone made every breath feel like a knife stab. "Mommy!" she screamed, but her voice was a hoarse whisper. The third day brought the fever. The insect bites on her legs were swollen and purple. The disorientation was so great that time began to melt in her delusions. She saw the face of her father. She spent hours sitting, looking at nothing, trying to process the abyss. Just 3 days ago, she was choosing a dress for dinner. Now she was counting her own heartbeats to know if she was still alive. Thirst was a burning sensation. She remembered her father's voice. "Follow the water, Julianne. Small rivers lead to big rivers, and big rivers lead to men." The fourth day revealed the scale of the disaster. The terrain opened into a clearing, and the scene didn't look real. Between the giant trees, the blue seats of the plane emerged. 3 passengers were there, but they no longer looked human. They were mud statues, planted upside down in the damp earth. The impact had thrown them with such force that only their legs, still wearing holiday shoes, stuck out of the ground. Julianne realized the jungle had become a cemetery, decorated with the remains of a party that never happened. The struggle from the 5th to the 9th day. Julianne no longer walked. She floated in shallow waters, letting the current carry her exhausted body. Hunger disappeared, replaced by a sweet metallic smell. Blowflies had laid eggs in her open arm wound, and hundreds of white maggots were digging tunnels under her skin, feeding on her while she was still breathing. On the 10th day, she spotted a boat. It was empty, but she found a gallon of gasoline. Julianne didn't hesitate. She poured the fuel directly onto the infested wound. The pain was an electric shock that made her scream for the first time in days. But the maggots began to jump out of her flesh. She removed 30 of them before collapsing from exhaustion. From the 5th to the 9th day, Julianne no longer walked. She floated in shallow waters, letting the current carry her exhausted body. Hunger disappeared, replaced by a sweet metallic smell. Blowflies had laid eggs in her open arm wound, and hundreds of white maggots were digging tunnels under her skin, feeding on her while she was still breathing. On the 10th day, she spotted a boat. It was empty, but she found a gallon of gasoline. Julianne didn't hesitate. She poured the fuel directly onto the infested wound. The pain was an electric shock that made her scream for the first time in days. But the maggots began to jump out of her flesh. She removed 30 of them before collapsing from exhaustion. The next morning, 3 men found her. They thought she was an evil spirit of the water. Julianne used her last strength to speak. "I am a passenger from the Lanza flight. My name is Julianne." Julianne was rescued and finally taken to her father's arms. The reunion was an absolute silence. A hug that tried to glue back the pieces of a destroyed life. However, the final revelation was the most terrible. The investigation discovered that Julianne was not the only one to survive the fall. At least 14 other people, including her mother, survived the impact. Maria lay just a few meters from where Julianne woke up, but gravely injured and unable to move. She died slowly, while her daughter walked in search of help. Julianne Koepka was the only one to survive Flight 508. She didn't leave that jungle with gifts, but with the brutal understanding that sometimes the greatest miracle in life is the weight of being the only light left after the entire sky has gone out. In the frozen desert of the South, death arrived in a flash of white and absolute cold. But nature has many ways to betray us. We are leaving the heights of a volcano for the warmth of a tropical paradise, a place where the sun is bright and the water is clear until it isn't, because sometimes the most terrifying thing isn't the storm you see coming, it's the ocean quietly stepping back, inviting you to your own end. The 2004 tsunami, the retreat of Fate Christmas. 2004 in Thailand was a paradise of light. Thousands of tourists from all over the world had traded the harsh winters of Europe and America for the white sands and crystal clear waters of Phuket and the Phi Phi Islands. December 26th dawned with a radiant sun. It was the perfect setting. Families having breakfast in beachfront bungalows, children playing with the gifts they had received the day before, and the gentle sound of waves breaking on the shore. But hundreds of miles away on the ocean floor, the earth had just torn itself apart. A magnitude 9.1 earthquake displaced a mass of water so vast that it altered the planet's rotation. The danger was coming, but it was silent and invisible. The suspense began with something that looked like a miracle, but it was a trap. Suddenly, the sea began to recede. It wasn't a normal tidal movement. The water simply vanished, pulling back hundreds of meters and exposing an ocean floor that no one had ever seen. Colorful fish were left flopping in puddles. Exotic corals were exposed to the sun, and ships that were anchored lay down on the dry sand. The people did not run. They were fascinated. Tourists walked toward the empty horizon, laughing, picking up shells, and taking photos of what they thought was a curious natural event. They didn't know that nature was just taking a breath for the final blow. The silence of the retreat was broken by a sound that many described as a freight train approaching, or the roar of 1,000 jet engines. On the horizon, a white line appeared. It didn't look like a wave from a movie, Kurosawa. It looked like a rising wall of concrete. When the water returned, it didn't just come to the shore. It came to take everything back. The wave hit the coast with the force of tons of TNT. The Christmas paradise was erased in seconds. Luxury bungalows were shredded like toothpicks. Cars, boats, and palm trees were swept away like toys in a bathtub. The real horror was not just the impact, but the debris soup. The water wasn't clean. It was a black mass of mud, twisted metal, glass and concrete that acted like a giant sandpaper, destroying everything it touched. Families who were holding hands seconds before were ripped apart by the force of the current. Parents felt their children's fingers slip away under the pressure of the water. Despair was not a scream. It was a silent suffocation under meters of rubble. When the water finally stopped rising and began to pull back into the sea, the scene was otherworldly. Where there were once luxury resorts and decorated Christmas trees, now there was only mud and corpses. The silence returned, but this time it was the silence of death. Survivors sat perched on concrete roofs or on top of hills, looking down and not recognizing the place where they were. Christmas ended with people wandering through mud-covered beaches, holding photos of their loved ones, asking strangers if they had seen a son or a husband. The celebration of life gave way to the largest body identification operation in modern history of the 230,000 people who died that day. Many are still under the sea. The 2004 tsunami left a grim lesson. Nature has no face. It has no mercy. And sometimes the most terrifying gift it can give is a moment of absolute beauty right before total destruction. The next story isn't a Christmas story, but I felt it needed to be here because even without the holidays, the cold is just as unforgiving, and sometimes the mountain decides who comes home and who stays behind forever. Jim Davidson and Mike Price had a dream: to conquer the feared Liberty Ridge route on Mount Rainier. The morning began calm, with a clear sky and the snow shining under the sun. But the glacier soon showed that the mountain would not give in easily. They were there to challenge their limits, to test their endurance, and strengthen years of friendship through climbing. The rope held them firmly together, every movement calculated, every step a test of balance and courage. The mountain seemed alive, and each crack of ice underfoot was a warning. As they advanced, the cold increased and the wind grew stronger. Snow covered the crevices, or hiding treacherous traps. The ice under Jim cracked loudly, and in an instant, a slab gave way. He slid down the slope at a terrifying speed, the rope stretching violently between him and Mike. Mike dug his feet into the hardened snow, holding with all his strength, his muscles tense, every fiber of his body working to avoid being dragged along. Snow rose in white clouds, partially blinding their vision. The cold air cut their faces, and the sound of breaking ice and Jim's muffled scream echoed across the glacier. Mike gripped the rope with all his strength, fingers digging into the fibers. His heart racing, each centimeter of the slide felt like an eternity. Finally, they managed to regain control, but not without exhaustion. Hands and feet numb, bodies shaking, breaths ragged. As they caught their breath, they noticed a vital tool, an ice axe, had been lost during the slide, fallen into the icy abyss. Without it, they could not safely continue. The wind grew stronger. The sunlight was fading quickly. They decided to descend further to find a flat area to camp. The descent was slow and meticulous. Every step required total attention. Mike led in front, guiding Jim. When a treacherous slab gave way partially under him, a sharp piece of ice fell. striking his thigh and pinning him down. Jim tried to approach, but twisted his ankle on the unstable snow. The cold penetrated their bones, and the wind pushed against them as if urging them toward the abyss. Mike was trapped, unable to move, pain radiating from his leg. Jim tried to pull the rope, but Mike's weight and position made it impossible to free him. Night approached quickly, and the temperature dropped, and making each breath painful and every step risky. Desperation grew. Jim lit a flare, but the snow and wind nearly extinguished its light immediately, making help impossible to signal. Time passed, each minute increasing the risk of Mike succumbing to the cold. With a heavy heart, Jim realized the only chance was to descend rapidly to seek help. He tied himself firmly to the rope and began the careful descent. Every step was a test. Hidden rocks, slippery ice, deep snow. His twisted foot throbbed with every movement. But he advanced, aware that every second counted. The landscape was harsh, unforgiving. Night enveloped everything in deep darkness, turning every shadow into a potential danger. Jim moved forward, breathing hard, every fiber of his body alert. Finally, he spotted an isolated cabin. A man inside helped him, taking him on a snowmobile to town to call for rescue. Every second of the ride felt endless, the cold burning his skin, and his mind racing with fear for his friend. When they reached the rescue site, tragedy was confirmed. Mike Price had succumbed to the fall in the cold. Desperation and guilt mixed with Jim's relief at having survived. He was exhausted, frozen, emotionally devastated, but alive. The mountain had tested their limits, challenged their friendship, and proved the strength of survival in the face of loss. Every decision had been crucial. Every second a battle between life and death. Jim understood that courage and perseverance are the only true allies in extreme environments, and that even the most prepared can be pushed to the limit. Tonight, these stories will stay with you. A reminder that the world is much colder and more unpredictable than we like to admit. If these cases gripped you, if they made you look twice at the shadows in your own home, then you belong here with us. Subscribe to the channel. Don't miss the next journey into the dark, because some stories are never truly over. Sleep well, if you can.